We've seen that if we follow the simple rule that the endowment fund managers use, half our money in an S&P growth strategy and half our money in absolute return strategies, that we now have a strategy to make money in good times and bad. And we don't have to pay anyone to do that. We can do it all ourselves. So over the next few minutes, I want to take a good hard look at the question, does anything change if I need to start withdrawing money from my investments, say, when I retire? And specifically, we'll look at two very familiar withdrawal strategies, things I'm sure we've all heard before. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to explain the advantages and disadvantages of each of those withdrawal strategies. So let's jump in. It seems obvious, but what is the goal of a mountain climber? To make it up the mountain, right? But if you ask experienced climbers this question, you get a slightly different answer. They would tell you that their goal is to make it safely up and safely down the mountain. You see, the vast majority of climbing accidents happen on the way down the mountain, not on the way up. Now, you might wonder, why is that? Because you would think that getting down the mountain isn't any more difficult than getting up the mountain. If anything, you'd think it was easier, right? And what does that have to do with anything we've been talking about? Well, here's the thing. It's one thing to have a strategy that will grow our nest egg. That's a lot like climbing the mountain. We save and invest the best we can for years until we reach the summit and get to that place where we can finally quit working. And our endowment fund strategy gives us a great way to self-manage our portfolio to that kind of success. And we assume that getting up the mountain was the hard part, and that getting down the retirement mountain, which means staying retired without giving up our lifestyle, isn't going to be any harder or any different than the climb up. If anything, it's going to be easier. But it doesn't work that way. That's the thing that mountain climbers have learned, and it's the reason they answer that question the way they answer it. What I'm about to show you is that getting down the retirement mountain is a lot different than going up, and that getting down is actually trickier than going up. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give those of you who want a deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of what makes going down the retirement mountain trickier a chance to reach back to me and get a more in-depth 7 or 8 minute video that zeroes in on just this topic. But for now, let me give you the bottom line. How you get your returns is more important than what the returns are when you retire. So let me say that again. How you get your returns is more important than what the returns are when you retire. Check this out. This chart looks at summiting the retirement mountain. It shows what would have happened if you'd started with $100,000 and invested over a 25-year period. Now notice the annual returns for both accounts are identical. They've just been flipped. Do you see that? The account at the left starts with a return of negative 12% and ends with a return of positive 29%. The account on the right starts with a plus 29% and ends with a minus 12%. Both accounts average 8% growth. They just have a different path by which they get there. But either way, that's a good market. Remember, that's exactly what the S&P 500 has averaged over the past 100 years. Now, what do you notice when you look at the ending balances? They're the same. It turns out that the key to success in summiting the retirement mountain is perseverance, just continuing to save and invest year after year. But look what happens when you add withdrawals from a portfolio. These are the same scenarios from the previous example, and to keep it apples to apples, the withdrawals on both sides are identical 5% withdrawals. But look at the outcomes. They couldn't be more different. If the blue chart represents summiting the retirement mountain, the red chart represents coming down the retirement mountain. And notice how some of the people made it up and made it back down with no problem, but some of the people who made it up didn't make it down. Why is that? Well, untimely withdrawals. Many investors were taught that the storm clouds to investing were downturns in the market. And because they were taught that, they have a mentality that if you just ride it out, be persistent, the markets will bounce back. You just need to stick to your long-term positive outlook about the future. But the red chart makes it super clear. The storm clouds aren't down years. Thinking that can get you killed. There are the same number of down years in the exact same order on the blue chart. The storm clouds are withdrawals. Withdrawing your money during dips in the market will absolutely kill your chances of staying retired. Now, the technical term for the problem we're talking about is sequence of return risk. And you can see that the risk is especially acute during those periods of erratic returns that can last 10 plus years. Well, is there anything we can do about it? Well, this obviously isn't a new problem. It's something that has been thought about and talked about forever. So it turns out that there are a couple of popular solutions that are generally floated, and I'm sure these will be familiar to you. Now, before we get started, I want to take a quick step back and set a couple of parameters for the income that we're looking for. We want our income to be two things. Think about your paycheck when you were working. Did you know how often you were going to get a check, or did they just surprise you with it every once in a while? I mean, you knew when to expect a check. It was reliable. And did you pretty much know the amount of the check, or was that always a surprise? I mean, you knew the amount of the check, so from that standpoint, it was predictable. Paychecks are reliable and predictable. It's why our Social Security checks are so important to us. They're reliable and predictable like paychecks, and that's what allows us to plan and budget around them. Now, ideally, we want all of our income in retirement to be like a paycheck. That way we can plan and budget. So, with that in mind, one possible solution is a bond ladder. Bonds pay a set rate of interest, which is important for two reasons. It's reliable. You know when to expect an interest payment. And it's predictable. You know how much you're going to get. It meets our criteria for reliable and predictable income. And you can easily calculate what you need to invest to get the reliable and predictable income you need. If you need $40,000 per year in income beyond your Social Security and bonds are paying 4%, you just divide $40,000 by 0.04 and you get $1 million. What that formula tells you is that if you invest $1 million in bonds that pay 4% per year, you'll receive $40,000 each year in reliable and predictable income. Easy, right? But $1 million is a lot. Now, not everyone needs $40,000 in income. That's just an example. You could cut the investment in half if you only needed half the income. But if you have most, if not all of your money in one investment, the first drawback that comes to mind is there isn't any diversification. But there are two other more serious drawbacks, and those drawbacks are inflation and interest rate volatility. Now, the good news about the $40,000 in bond income is that it will always be $40,000 in income. The bad news about the $40,000 in bond income is that it will always be $40,000 in income, and over the course of the typical retirement, everything becomes more expensive because of inflation. But the biggest drawback of a bond ladder is interest rate volatility. And the easiest way to explain that is by thinking of a teeter-totter. Interest rates and bond values move opposite each other like a teeter-totter. So when interest rates go down, just like a teeter-totter, bond values go up. Conversely, when interest rates go up, just like a teeter-totter, bond values go down. Now, there's an easy explanation for why that happens. Just think in terms of supply and demand. Suppose you have a bond paying 2%, and everything else, a CD at the bank, for example, is paying 1%. Now, which of those do you want? The bond paying 2% or the 1% CD? I mean, your bond value will go up when interest rates go down because more people want it. But let's say interest rates go from 1% to 3% over the next year. Now which do you want? The CD paying 3% or the bond paying 2%? Nobody wants the bond anymore. So when interest rates went up, bond values went down. Do you see the teeter-totter? But the Fed recently lowered interest rates to near zero because of the economic uncertainty of the times. Interest rates can only go one direction from here, and that's up. And that means bond values are certain to go down. That's why the famous investor and hedge fund manager Ray Dalio is on record as saying, "You'd be pretty crazy to hold bonds right now." Now, I don't think anyone foresaw what was going to happen with interest rates and bonds, so no one is going to recommend that strategy to you anytime soon. Instead, what most advisors will recommend these days is putting your money in a big bucket, so to speak. Now, some of that is going to be in stocks and some of it in other investments, and that eliminates the diversification problem. And the idea is that you just withdraw a percentage, like 4 or 5% of the portfolio each year. Now, sometimes the money you take out will be from interest, sometimes from dividends, and sometimes from capital gains. And as long as the markets cooperate, you'll be fine. But why do I say as long as the markets cooperate? Remember, we're taking systematic withdrawals now to supplement our income in retirement. And we saw that the storm clouds were withdrawals during down periods. Do the markets always cooperate? Are they always going up? But we're always taking withdrawals, and in periods of erratic ups and downs, we won't be able to avoid taking money during downturns. And if there are no dividends or interest or capital gains because the market is down when you withdraw money, if you still want or need the money, where does it have to come from? Principal. But if you start drawing down your principal, what do you start to be afraid of? Now, there's a possible solution to this problem. What a good financial advisor would tell you is the market is experiencing a downturn, but it's temporary. It'll bounce back. It always does. Just don't take any withdrawals for the next 3 to 6 months so we can ride this out, and then we can start taking money again. Well, what would have happened if your employer had said, hey, it's been a little slow lately, but things are going to pick up. They always do. Just don't expect a paycheck for the next 3 to 6 months while we ride this out, and then we'll start paying you again. I mean, what kind of pickle would most people be in? I mean, how many people could actually afford to do that? And that's why you get this phenomenon of people withdrawing money and stumbling on the way down the retirement mountain. They have to take the withdrawals no matter what because they need the money to live on. But if the sequence of returns doesn't fall exactly right, you're going to end up in big trouble. So again, we can ladder bonds to produce income, but with interest rates at zero, that's not even a possibility anymore. Or we could just put our money in a big bucket and withdraw a percentage of our money each year, but the markets would have to cooperate. And can we count on that in this new normal? The truth is that those other plans could work, and that's why they're often recommended. I mean, you could, until recently, put all your money in bonds and get your income that way. Or you could put your money in a big bucket of mixed investments and just withdraw a percentage from the account and get your income that way. But in both of these scenarios, the sequence of returns has to be just right. Neither of those methods is guaranteed to work. And if you don't believe me, just go ask your financial advisor a simple question when he puts together one of these income plans for you. Just ask him, is this guaranteed to work? And then sit back and see what he says. But there is a third way. Remember, the endowment funds are withdrawing money from each and every year to help the universities pay their expenses. And next time, I'll show you how they're able to make those withdrawals in good markets and bad without fear of crashing the endowment fund. And remember, if you want a more in-depth explanation and analysis of sequence of return risk, just reply to this email and just type the 3 words sequence of return in the body of the reply, and I'll email you a 7-minute video that goes into more detail. Until next time.